Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
It is great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Very good. We want to talk about something that's been in the news. Unfortunately for us in Texas, we're in the news because we are the capital of the energy industry. We probably produce more energy than any other state, and here we are in big trouble. And already it's the blame game. Some group says, it's the Greenies. They caused the whole thing. If we didn't have them pestering us, this wouldn't have happened. And others will say that, no, it's those greedy capitalists and they were making too much money and they wouldn't follow the rules and this sort of thing. So it's an argument. Who's to blame? Which politician is to blame? And, the governors will get some blame, but also they are throwing some blame around on the regulators, and that's getting pretty close to the matter. And there's this group called the ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. They're the ones who run the show and write all the regulation. Well, it looks like they weren't very reliable. But an interesting piece of information came out on this subject of who's responsible. And this I find fascinating because this whole program, we talk about lockdown and all the problems of lockdowns and civil liberties and viruses and vaccines and all that. But believe it or not, this subject we're talking about is very closely related to the lockdown. And the NBC, of all groups, put an article out, and they did some research and wrote about this, and they found out that each year they're supposed to go through an inspection so that the windmills and all are in good shape and prepared for the winter. And this year they didn't do it, and the reason they didn't do it was because of COVID. All the restrictions and the lockdowns and all. And they did only 16% of the windmills were checked, and that was remotely. They didn't even go and look at them. So they were essentially abandoned, and of course that added fuel to the fire. There's a lot more that we'll talk about that brings these crises to light, but it's also the failure of the so-called plan on how it's going to be handled. And sometimes the plans just go differently. They say, we've been listening to the Greenies, and I've been sort of crossing my fingers. And I said, if what they're saying isn't all that too bad, because a little bit of warmth, we're at the freeze line where I live, and that means we rarely get a frost. Well, believe me, we've had a frost, we've had a freezing. And I just say, with tongue in cheek, let's blame the Greenies because we didn't get enough warmth. We didn't get hardly any. And I'm also predicting, with just off the top of my head that I don't think our area and where I live is going to see another frost, because today it's going to warm up, and usually we don't have a frost at this time of year. We usually don't have them in the fall, and this is an exception, it looks like. But anyway, it's been very, very damaging, and there's a lot of talk about who exactly to blame. And in our title of the article, we're implying that, those people say it's the Greenies, it's the windmills. And we know they're a contributing factor, but there's a lot more to it than that. And it reminded me of what Carville said in 1992 when they were trying to figure out what's the important issue for Clinton to win. And finally, he kept preaching to his workers and the volunteers. It's the economy, stupid. It's the economy. And then when he won, everybody had that sunk in. But I suggested that we had addressed the subject of not saying the economy, also it is the economy and how it's being run. It's the central economic planning, stupid. And of course, we've been talking about the ill effects of central economic planning, the bureaucracy, the regulations, the expense, the making of decisions, the choices made. And when you when you ruin the price system, and you have too many bureaucrats, and we have way too many, like just about all of them, things don't work out as well. So it's central economic planning. It is the real culprit as far as I'm concerned, and there's a lot of blame to go along, except the most important one is those who accept the principle of central economic planning, and it's not the poor people that usually come up with. Yeah, they participate in it. They might say, well, I'm going to get a better job, or I'm going to get cheaper energy or something like this. But big money is involved. If you really study this issue carefully, you will find out there's a lot of corporatism, crony capitalism, and that's been going on in Texas for a long time. A lot of people in Texas probably don't know, and they'll resent what I'm saying. But you know, in 1892 or 96, they started the Railroad Commission, and they were regulating railroads, but then they started regulating the price of oil. And all this time, they've been regulating the price of oil to benefit the Texans, to get the maximum amount they can get for oil. So they weren't believers in the free market because there was tremendous oil discoveries here in Texas that would drive the price down, and that wouldn't help, everybody. So if they regulated the price of oil, they would do better off. And that's essentially what's been going on now. Whether it's the legislation and the public pressure on people to use windmills over natural gas. We have natural gas, we still flare, and there's other things that, that could be used if the market decided the most efficient and the best price for it. So this would be a lot easier to do if we were allowed to let the market settle these questions. Instead, we say the bureaucrats can do it, but that's the special interest thinking they're going to get a better deal. And right now, as we read more about this past couple of weeks, the grid going down could have been a lot more dangerous than anybody, or at least if it's true, it was a lot worse than I ever dreamed of. And as far as I'm concerned, it's just bad policy. I mean, this whole idea that the bureaucrats are going to decide whether or not you can burn a lump of coal, have any nuclear power plants anymore, whether you can use natural gas, how much solar you have to have, how much windmills you have to have. We still use half of our energy comes from gas, which is not too bad, even though the environmentalists don't want us to touch that. But it's probably clean and cheap and better off. But there's a case to be made from my viewpoint that you shouldn't just throw nuclear power out the window. The one example that I use of why I'm somewhat sympathetic to nuclear is that it's probably very, very dangerous, but probably the least dangerous of all of them. All these sources, like windmills now, it looks like it provides some danger too. So it's nuclear. The reason I'm, in a practical sense, more sympathetic, I said, isn't it true that they have nuclear reactors on aircraft carriers, and we have nuclear submarines? Submarines go down, they're small, they have a nuclear reactor there, and they stay down there long periods of time, and they sleep next to these nuclear reactors. And how many people have you heard that ever died from radiation sickness from either an aircraft carrier or a submarine? So I think that's a different story. But no, so there's been a distortion there. So there's essentially no nuclear, and there's always this pushing on something renewable, which I like. I sort of am fascinated with windmills, and I think in the old days, if we just allowed windmill technology to develop instead of subsidizing rural electrification, we'd have had the sophistication of windmills a lot sooner. But now it was impede and then overproduce and then force it on people, and we end up with a crisis like we have gone through this past week. Chris?
That's right, Dr. Paul. The point that we're trying to make is energy, along with everything else, but today we're talking about energy, shouldn't be imposed by political force. It should be decided voluntarily in the marketplace. And I personally don't care what energy is used, coal, oil, wind, solar, natural gas, nuclear, but I do care if it's imposed by force versus it being freely chosen by customers and companies. And none of it should be subsidized either. Not oil, not wind, not solar. I'm not working here right now, so that money could be taken from me and given to any company, no matter what they make. Now, the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, no, you don't understand. Government cares about the environment. And I don't buy that for 1 second. Do you know who the top, or just about at the top, polluter in the entire world is? It's the U.S. government, and specifically their military. They have around 1,000 bases scattered all over the world, and they fight endless wars. So it's not me, it's not you, it's not any individual American, but the U.S. government that is the biggest polluter on the planet. So I don't want to hear that they want to care about the environment, because they have no inclination or desire to stop being the biggest polluter. So this is about politics and control, and that's not how energy or any other product or service should be done in this country.
Chris, your point about the military is very important because it's never discussed from the point of view of pollution. Because quite frankly, it's a very bipartisan issue where it's supported by both parties, because the military budgets never go down and they're used. Intervention overseas never goes down, so it's there. Some do a better job than others on foreign policy, but they all, even Sanders has voted for something in the military-industrial complex when it was in Vermont, this sort of thing. So it's very malicious and part of the problem. And the other thing is the subsidies. The first thing I'm sure people have already said if they've listened to my first opening is, oh yeah, nuclear, that is dangerous, and why do this? And they're rant and rave, and people make profits off this, but in the market that doesn't happen. There would be no subsidies. But nuclear was developed by the government. It was insured by the government. And it's subsidized by the government, so and the regulations depend on the government. So we don't. The truth is we don't know how safe nuclear is, and that's why we don't know how beneficial wind power could be. Maybe wind power could be very, very important in a narrow sense, maybe for the smaller communities or something. But and then with a little bit of understanding, maybe if it didn't depend on a government agency to inspect the windmills before a cold winter was coming, maybe they would be. It's sort of the way land is treated when the when land is treated and it's it's a common land and owned by the government, everybody owns it, nobody really takes care of it, or when it's private property. Big difference. So that's what happens when the government's responsible for it. But another example I think of, I've never had anybody comment on this, but I happen to think it's worth thinking about because there's a distortion. The people up in the Dakotas have been very, very successful with fracking. Not so much now because of the supply and demand. The fracking was not developed by free markets. It was subsidized to a tremendous amount, and nobody ever decided whether it was really economically feasible. So this is the reason why people who say, I know what's best, solar is best, wind power, nuclear, or coal, do they know about how to handle these things? Matter of fact, I've read some stuff on coal, and it's not like a deadly weapon on people. Sure, but to let the market sort it out, it costs too much because you don't have the right to pollute. The libertarian absolutely accepts it. You have no right to pollute another person's property. So, and you have to be liable. We insure this stuff. So if somebody's hurt with nuclear or any energy, they say, so who's going to pay for the injury done by this past week because of the messed up bureaucracy that gave the wrong information? So Chris, I agree with your assumption as well that the market is a lot smarter than a bunch of bureaucrats.
It absolutely is. And earlier, Dr. Paul, you mentioned the Central Planning Agency, the ERCOT, Electric Reliability Council of Texas. And our friend Robert Wenzel, he spoke to a bunch of energy experts that he knows. And he pointed out on his website that their responses to him were always, well, ERCOT did this wrong, or ERCOT needs to do this. And he asked him, well, what would a free market energy look like, between the providers and the customers only? And he was greeted with silence. It just doesn't enter their mentality. It's this top-down mentality that Americans are suffering. And it's not just in energy. Look at the COVID. hundreds of millions of people are waiting around for Fauci to tell them that they could live their lives. Well, the people in Florida didn't, and look how great they're doing. The thing is we're all different. Individuals are different. Environments are different. Texas is different than California, than South Dakota, than New Jersey. And even within Texas and within New Jersey, the different sections and towns are different. But there is this obsession, especially on the left, of trying to impose one size fits all on everybody. And the globalists want it on everybody in the world. That's how far out they are. And what happens is they're trying to wipe out reality, and people are suffering. You can't change the fact that we're all different, that environments are different. And the longer that we continue down this road of one size fits all, the more we're going to suffer.
Very good. Immediately after the seriousness of this crisis that we had broke, there was the blaming, and the far left radical environmentalists said, did you notice that the right wing immediately said, "Oh, it's conserving energy," and it's because they don't like preservation. They don't support the left on dealing with all the things that total control, and they want the marketplace. So they immediately suggested it, but the right said it too. They said, "Well, it's only." The people like in the social movement and the environment movement, and they're at fault, and they partially are at fault. But the other side, the crony capitalists, are part of the problem too, because they're always wanting subsidies, and they want the regulations, they want their protections, and they benefit from that. So both sides are benefited. And Chris, you make the perfect point. Even talking to them, they say, "Well, let the market tell us what happened." What do you mean? How can they know anything? So this to me is a very interesting subject, because it becomes very politicized. And I even mentioned this whole thing about how COVID actually distorted the inspections before this winter started, because because of COVID was a prohibition and interfered with all this, and the inspection didn't get done. I just don't think that would happen if the owners of everything, and they were regulating, and it was their responsibility, wouldn't be cautious. And back to the manufacturing of or the management of land. Privately owned forests are better cared for than government-owned forests. There's a lot more fires there, but no, that can't be. We can't do it the way free markets would handle a forest. They don't know what they're doing. But private ownership and private responsibility, and not artificial support with regulations, artificial support. Just the old item that we talk about all the time is low interest rates. What if you give low interest rates for wind power, and that's calculated in? Oh, that makes wind power, more profitable than nuclear power or whatever. So they're pushed over into it. And I often thought, fracking was a great idea, and it still has some future. But right now, who knows? They don't know, because one of the big bonuses that the fracking investors got was the fact that they had very, very low interest rates, and they got subsidies of all sorts, and the regulations benefit them, and until it ends. So that's why, yes, their problems are out there. The market realizes that the problems are there, but the market solves it differently. They solve it by efficiency and price, safety, and that will all be measured into it. Because, like, back to nuclear again, if the nuclear companies had to pay and protect and guarantee safety and have insurance against it, it would have been different. But because the government guaranteed the insurance, you never were able to calculate. And so the calculation of the price of energy is just not there. And like the Texans knew very early on that if you didn't interfere, the price of energy, who would have benefited if they never existed? The Railroad Commission never existed to keep those prices, keep the market weaker, so the prices would go up. They manipulated the prices up, and so the consumer had to pay more. So it's a pretty strong rule that we would like to see, is that hands off, because the hands of the bureaucrats and the politicians and the banksters and the special companies, I'll tell you what, they can't do anything near what a private market could do, where the owners are responsible for taking care of it and for the safety and for the price.
Great, Dr. Paul. I will finish up by saying that what we're after is to foster a change in mentality in our country. Anybody that even has a passing knowledge of politics understands that in order to capture power, people will do anything. They'll go to any length, trample over anybody to get into that power. Our approach is the exact opposite. We're not looking to capture. We're looking to replace, not capture. The goal is not to get into government and do public schooling correctly, because that is impossible. The whole idea is flawed. That's where the whole one size fits all starts with the kids. So the goal is not to become Fed chairman so that you can price fix correctly. The whole idea is flawed. Nobody should be price fixing. So the goal is replace, not capture. And I'll give a few examples on what exactly that means. Think about the media. They have been in decline for a long time, and they sure have not helped themselves over the last 4 or 5 years. They are being replaced. Nobody's going in and taking over these giant companies. They're just being replaced by alternatives. And we now live in a time where you never have to look at the mainstream media again if you choose not to. And you can be just as informed as anybody else. And the same is being done with schooling. Even though the public schools exist, you don't have to go in and take them over. People are homeschooling their kids. And that is how you're replacing and not capturing. And you can now not have to deal with public schools either. So inch by inch, we can chip away at a time and make these colossal failures irrelevant to our lives. And so that I think is very promising. So always keep in your mind, replace, not capture.
Very good, Chris. The Greenies and others will say, it's not their fault. Everybody wants to find the blame. And some people will argue, and on the surface, it'll sound pretty good. They'll say, well, this is freakish. This is not what happened. This is a freak of nature. And it's the storm. It's the ice, stupid. It has nothing to do with central economic planning and politicians and interest rates. It's the ice. It's nature that did this. But the Greenies may chirp in and say, see what we told you. Oh, we don't believe so much in global warming anymore, but we do believe in climate change. And this is just changing of climate. It's because we have industries, because we live with using energy to keep our houses warm and cool when we want, and having a better lifestyle. So it'll go back and forth. And the whole thing is, though, if you don't decide what actually caused it and looked for the answer, nothing good is going to happen. And the answer comes in mismanagement, misallocation, misunderstanding, and a little bit of confidence in property, contract rights, and whatever. We came up with a shortage of energy in this past week. All of a sudden, the prices skyrocketed, and there was a crisis, and they said, oh, somebody sold some gas, some energy across the state line. We have to ban that from happening. But that is not going to solve the problem, because in a private market, maybe the storages would be worked out. In energy, wind electricity, where do you store it? Batteries are great, and they're getting better all the time, and I think they're going to get a lot better. But how do you store it? You really can't do it. So maybe the market would have said that if a crisis comes, we're going to have stored energy. But they didn't have the storage. They were on the margin. The margin of energy was being produced by wind energy. So you couldn't make the winds blow harder because they were frozen. So they had to look around, and they did use a little bit of coal. They did use a little bit of nuclear to try to get by. But a marketplace that has the responsibility for having the backup, they are not guaranteed to do everything right, but they're guaranteed to do a lot better than depending on politicians and the bureaucrats and illegal type of funding where you distort the cost of money, believe me, it's going to be much better. But right now, I would say, since nobody's really looking at the root cause of this problem, we're going to have a lot more of this. And the response, unfortunately, will be more regulations. And hopefully we wake up, now the news is out, that the virus is winding down, herd immunity is around the corner, and maybe we won't have that to contend with. So we had all these factors. And then we have the people dealing with the virus and the lockdown, interfering and causing even more troubles for that. Look to Liberty. Liberty solves a lot of problems. It's imperfect, but it's so much better than depending on politicians and special interests and wealthy business people that are able to manipulate the environment and all the finances of this. So we at this station and this channel vote for liberty, and I believe that is the best way to move toward peace and prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.